Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 12 years ago, the United States Congress was on the precipice of passing historic climate legislation. Legislation that may not have been perfect, but it would have cut carbon pollution by 80% by the year 2050. And it would have set us on a path to a healthier, cleaner, safer world. Unfortunately, despite that bill passing through the House of Representatives, a bill which Congressman Henry Waxman and I were able to craft and to move through the House of Representatives, that legislation, even though the Senate and the Senate Democrats had a supermajority, that legislation was ultimately defeated by the same legislative body, the United States Senate, that I serve in today. In 2009, the United States Senate chose to do nothing rather than something substantial that would give us a fighting chance against this generational crisis, which is why we have spent the last 12 years in the climate wilderness with full-blown Republican obstructionism and no meaningful congressional action on climate justice, all the while that wilderness literally burns to the ground because of climate change. In the intervening decade, we have suffered the consequences of climate inaction. Weather that used to be extreme is now the new normal. And that normal is deadly. Our addiction to fossil fuels has put communities at risk, worsening asthma, cancers, and disease in general, and has exposed working people to criminal price gouging from big oil and big gas. Throughout this summer, the United States has experienced devastating heat waves, putting 100 million Americans under heat warnings across the country. People are dying in Kentucky. Children are dying in Kentucky as a result of the extreme rain and floods, rain that still hasn't stopped. Those are so-called 100-year floods. Well, now they're happening on a weekly basis in Kentucky, over and over again. Communities throughout the United States are facing deadly wildfires, storms, and droughts, all of which have become more frequent and more severe over the last 12 years. But instead of giving up after that missed opportunity more than a decade ago, we re-engaged, we rebuilt, and re-energized a stronger, smarter climate movement, one that expanded carbon calculators to include climate justice, one that swapped complicated carbon trading systems for direct funding for environmental justice communities in our country, and one that exchanged an environmental above all strategy for a 21st century contract with communities with the promise of climate justice, well-paid union jobs, and cuts to climate pollution so all of our children and grandchildren can thrive on a livable planet. So let me be clear. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is not the Green New Deal that America wants and needs. I wish it were. But I've learned a hard truth throughout my years in Congress. Perfect ideas can only live on through imperfect legislation. As the author of both the Green New Deal and the Waxman-Markey climate bill, I know we cannot wait another 12 years for billions of dollars in investment to fight the climate crisis. This is not the bill we wanted. It's not the bill I would have drafted. But we need a package now to fight for and resources to fight with. This bill will not correct every economic injustice in our society or rectify the economic disparities between big oil billionaires and working families, but it starts a process that we absolutely need to level the playing field. The Inflation Reduction Act makes sure that every billion-dollar corporation finally pays a higher tax rate than a preschool teacher. Last year, a preschool teacher in Massachusetts paid 8% of their average $39,000 salary in federal taxes. ExxonMobil paid only 2.8% of their $9.3 billion U.S. earnings in federal taxes. Chevron paid a mere 1.8% of their $9.5 billion in U.S. earnings in federal taxes in 2021. A kindergarten teacher in Massachusetts paid 8% on $39,000 of income. Who did more for America last year? All of our kindergarten teachers or the executives at ExxonMobil and Chevron? Who contributed more to our society? That is our challenge right now, to pass this legislation, because the status quo is immoral. It's outrageous. And unless we pass this bill, that disparity is perfectly legal. They can evade their responsibility to contribute to solving the problem which they created, the climate crisis. Right now, they're letting preschool teachers contribute more than they are to a problem that families across our country are suffering from. By passing the Inflation Reduction Act, we can make sure that big oil finally pays more in taxes than preschool teachers. We can take that revenue and reinvest it in a clean energy and healthier communities. This bill will not give the climate movement the trillions needed to confront the crises of systematic racism, economic inequality, a broken health system, and climate injustice. But thanks to our relentless fighting, this bill contains an historic $60 billion in environmental justice investments. Let me say that again. $60 billion will be in this bill to begin the process of rectifying the problems for Black and brown and indigenous communities all across our country, who have always been the victims of climate change, of environmental injustice. This has never happened before in any bill in U.S. history. It's in this bill, finally. Now, that's the message of the Green New Deal. That was something that was driving Fox News and the oil companies crazy when we said, we have to rectify environmental injustice as well as part of the Green New Deal. It's in this bill. It's in this bill, $60 billion. And that will begin to start righting the wrongs wrought by polluters in our most vulnerable communities. This could be a down payment on clean air and safer communities everywhere, not just the suburbs, which have always breathed cleaner air than inner city communities, because they don't plant these oil and gas and other facilities in the suburbs. They put them right next to who they believe are the least powerful communities in our country. We know this bill will not get us to the critical mark of 50% emissions reductions by 2005 levels by 2030, which is the baseline of what we need to meet our 2050 targets. However, this package gets us to 40% reductions economy-wide, and more importantly, it puts our economy on an emissions reductions trajectory that positions us to enact more clean energy and climate justice provisions in the future to meet the 50% goal. Securing these emissions reductions now is the start which we need, and we need it now. This legislation reflects the largest single investment in climate justice and environmental protection in our nation's history, and it meets the climate test First, it reduces emissions, creates good-paying union jobs, and provides funding so that we can begin the long process of repairing historic harms in our environmental justice communities with that $60 billion investment. Second, the bill lowers energy costs for consumers. Price gouging and tax dodging. Big oil companies are charging Americans more than $4 a gallon for gasoline, shaking money out of their pockets at the pumps all across our country. And what we're going to do is just point to the electric vehicle owners who pay an equivalent of 75 cents a gallon right now in our country in order to go the same distance. And we're going to open up this opportunity to tens of millions of additional Americans once we pass it. The Inflation Reduction Act provides tax credits to low and middle-income Americans so they can buy a new or a used EV, break their addiction to big oil, and save money on their daily commutes. And finally, the Inflation Reduction Act will make sure we make things in America again. The domestic manufacturing tax credits in this bill, for the first time, ensure that we will build electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines here in our own backyard in the United States. American-made infrastructure means good-paying American union jobs, and a new study released today shows that this bill will create, get ready, 9 million new jobs in our country. That is what we're talking about. That is what will be debated on the floor of the United States Senate over the next several days. And I'm especially proud of a provision I authored with Senator Chris Van Hollen and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell that would fund a national climate bank to ensure vulnerable American communities will have access to capital to invest in local clean energy projects and fuel a new generation of entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. How big is this program? $27 billion in a climate bank that communities across the country can apply to have the lowest possible interest rates for their greening of their housing units, the greening of any other part of their community. And what McKinsey has estimated is that for every dollar that's in the bank, $27 billion, it will unleash $7 to $10 of private sector investment, meaning we're looking at $200 to $300 billion that are going to get unleashed just in this section, in that one program. And Critical Defense Production Act funding will ensure that we have robust domestic supply chains to install heat pumps in American buildings and responsibly source critical minerals for clean energy technologies made in America. Okay, we have to break this whole addiction that we have, not only to foreign oil coming into our country, but also being dependent upon other countries for the clean energy technologies. We're going to do it here. That's what this bill says. We're going to tell people we don't need your oil any more than we need your sand. We're going to do it right here. We're going to build the technologies right here in our country. So my time in Congress has taught me this. We cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Ending up with nothing might be a viable political option, but it is not a viable planetary option. This is a good bill with broad-based appeal that lowers costs for consumers, fights inflation with deficit reduction, protects our environment with critical justice investments, and provides affordable health care access to all Americans. In 2009, zero was an option, which this Senate took. Zero is not an option we can take. We must pass this legislation, and we will begin a pathway for generations to come that says we understood your anger. we understood why you, as a younger generation, believed that the system had failed you and that it had not provided the solutions which you deserve. So let's pass this bill and keep fighting in cities and states and in the White House and in Congress so that we can finish the job in the years ahead, meet our climate targets, and finally pass the Green New Deal that our country deserves. This is our moment. And the beauty of it is that there's a poetic justice in it. And it is that Chevron only paying 2.8% on their profits last year. ExxonMobil only paying 3% on their profits last year. They're the ones who are going to pay for the solutions to the problems which they created. They're going to be the source of the funding because we're going to force them to finally pay their taxes, to pay their fair share of the dues to live in this great country. That moment of justice is arriving, and it is justice. They are the ones who should be paying for this. They are the ones who have a moral, political, and economic responsibility to pay for this bill. And they, right now, they are screaming. They are absolutely angry that we are going to take this action. But I will tell you this, we're going to be forced to do it with no Republican support because the GOP now stands for Gas and Oil Party. It now stands for a gang of polluters. That's the GOP of today. And they're going to say, oh my goodness, look at all the socialism that's going into this package for wind and solar and all electric vehicles and batteries. And you know what this young generation's response is? What do you call tax breaks for oil, gas, and coal for 100 years? If that's not socialism, what is? And all we're looking for is fair treatment for the renewable energy revolution. Because once we give them the same kinds of incentives, get out of the way. Because we're going to have that revolution that young people in our country have wanted for so long. So it's all on us, the Democrats. It's our moment to deliver for the American people and guarantee the resources we need to keep fighting for the future we deserve. And by the way, after we've created those 9 million new jobs, that's forever going to be a new political constituency in our country. We're going to be saying to senators who are going to vote no today, what are you doing? You're voting against my new job that has been created. And so this is just the beginning. And we're going to telescope the time frame ultimately in order to finish the job. Yes, we're now in a sprint to solve the problem because every night on every TV station, the lead stories are floods and fires and every other imaginable consequence of climate change. And it is time. The moment has arrived, and the United States Senate, with only Democratic support, is ready to take the action that the younger generation in our country has been waiting for. I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity of being here, and I yield the floor. Thank you.